Welcome to the Pittsburgh Dish. I'm your host, Doug Heilman. How did a 3 a.m. baby feeding lead a couple into restaurant ownership? We'll hear about it from this week's guest. What are some of the best wines to pair with that smoky grill flavor? We have some ideas from our wine expert. And how to keep shrimp as the star in a Southern recipe for shrimp and grits. All that ahead. Stay tuned. Hey, thanks so much for coming on to the show. Would you introduce yourself and what you have going on right now in food?
Sure. I am Todd Brezinski. Right now, I am owning and operating Jimmy Wan's in Fox Chapel.
And we should clarify, because you don't sound like part of the family right away. You are Kristen's husband.
Yes, I am married to Kristen Wan.
Yes.
My father-in-law is Jimmy Wan, and my brother-in-law is Jimmy Wan.
Exactly. And Jimmy Wan Sr. is a little bit more retired from the business, would you say? And his son...
I might say that. He might not say that.
Okay, but maybe we won't say that.
No, I mean, yes. At the end of the day, we're sort of going through, I would say, the generational transition that every business owner would probably like to do.
Yeah.
But a lot of times your kids don't want to do what your parents did. And my wife might feel the same way. But in general, my father-in-law is stepping back and my mother-in-law is stepping back. My wife and I are stepping forward, and my brother-in-law has been there for 18 years. So he's already been there. We're sort of meeting him where he's at.
Right. And if for any of our listeners that are not familiar with Jimmy Wan's, there are two locations. There's one up in Cranberry, and that's where Jimmy Jr. has been managing for a bit. Is that right?
Yeah. So they opened in Cranberry 18 years ago.
Right.
And actually my wife graduated college right when they opened. And so she helped open that location as well. She stayed in Pittsburgh through 2009 when they opened in Fox Chapel 15 years ago. And then we started dating around that time, and she moved to New York where I was living.
Oh, wow.
In 2010.
And that's an incredible run for a restaurant. A couple of things that are really sparking my mind right now is, A, the longevity of both places, 15 years in Fox Chapel, 18 years in Cranberry. The positive side of this is that generational change is happening, because so often a lot of family restaurants, there isn't a next generation that wants to take it over. And it also sounds to me, when we were talking earlier, you and your wife are sort of taking some of the reins around Fox Chapel, and you have both sort of injected some newer things into the operations of it, the modernization of just how things run.
Yeah, for sure. I think, I have a consulting background, which we could get into later, but, when I came in, the first thing I did was sort of question some things, which obviously ruffles some feathers, but also, I'll use one example. We use, and tell me if this example's bad or not, but in Fox Chapel, we ordered produce from two different companies, and we ordered the same things on Monday from one provider and the same things on Thursday from another provider. I said, why do we use two providers? Why not double our business or double their business and see what we can get from them? And so those sorts of things just sort of went unasked for a long time. They're no one's fault. But what we tried to do was sort of just inject some new life, some new thinking into the restaurants so that we could approach, the next decade with some renewed vigor for the restaurants.
Yeah, perfect. I also think we should talk first about what the restaurants are known for in terms of what are some of the most popular dishes or how you guys even describe the cuisine. It's not just Chinese cooking. How do you describe what's going on now and what are some of the most ordered things today?
For sure. I think, it's funny when you've been around for as long as these restaurants have been around, I'm sure they've assumed many personas. 5-10 years ago, it was in vogue to say you were Pan-Asian. And so you see a lot of things refer to Jimmy Wan's as Pan-Asian. Nowadays, Pan-Asian has more of a negative connotation where you think about an Asian restaurant that tries to do too much. And so they don't do any of it well, or they're not focusing on what, the chef or the ownership, truly does well in order to please the masses. And so in general, in restaurants, you've seen a move back towards authenticity in cuisine. I mean, just go up to Squirrel Hill and you can see that as you walk down the road.
Right.
At Jimmy Wan's, I would say, we're a Chinese restaurant with a sushi bar. which is really what we do. There are some, broader cultural elements that we bring into it, be they American or other Asian cultures. But at the end of the day, the food is pretty authentically Chinese and Japanese or sushi. Our biggest seller by far, it's not even really close, is General Tso's chicken.
Oh, yes.
At first, when I showed up, I was like, well, how do we sell more of other things, besides General Tso's chicken? But over the months, I've sort of realized that there's no shame in that, like stick to what you do well, and you can sort of branch out from there.
But I don't want to leave out, you all have a really good cocktail service at both locations as well, which I think gives you an edge.
For sure. Like the layer on top of the Chinese restaurant and sushi bar is it's also a little bit upscale, right? You can go and get fantastic wines. We have an amazing cocktail program. Fun fact, Jimmy, my brother-in-law up in Cranberry, is actually the #1 seller of Clase Azul tequila in the entire state of Pennsylvania. Wow. Which is interesting to think that a Chinese restaurant in Cranberry is, the #1 seller of any brand of tequila. The family and especially my brother-in-law have spent a lot of time curating a pretty amazing beverage program that really lends itself to the cuisine. That sort of adds to the upscale part of it. It's a place you can go to grab a glass of wine with friends, as well as, have a big Chinese feast with your family, which is how we want people to use the restaurant.
I love it. I mean, I also want to say, like, when I have visited your locations, the plating, the styling of the food, all of that adds to sort of that upscale feel. Everybody's dish looks really good. Could you share just a couple of the biggest sellers? I know you mentioned earlier General Tso's chicken. Is there anything else that's just been on the menu forever or is always a fan favorite?
A lot of our sort of dumpling offerings. So if we move away from the entrees, like what's core to what Jimmy Wan's does and something where we're relatively unique is that we've had the same chef in Fox Chapel for 15 years.
Wow.
He's actually a dim sum trained chef. And so he started by making dim sum for both restaurants, and a few years ago took over the whole kitchen in Fox Chapel. And I would say the work that he does with dumplings, making them in-house, making the variety of dumplings that he does and how we plate those and serve those really adds to all of those elements that I was describing earlier.
Yeah. And this is not an easy cuisine, right? There's a lot of labor-intensive technique going on in the back of the house. Is that right?
That is correct. I have as many people in the kitchen on any given night as I do in the front.
Oh my goodness. And so you guys are doing your own dumplings. You're doing probably in-house butchering, all of the other mise en place that needs to take place. And it's intricate.
Yeah, I mean, this is going to be very inside baseball, as I like to say. But one of the things that I think makes our food unique and good is that we start with whole chickens.
Yeah.
And so we go through, between the two restaurants, we go through 1,000 chickens a week, which is probably more chickens than any restaurant in Pittsburgh. But we start with whole chickens. We have a very specific chicken that we like to get. It's a 3.5 to 4 pound bird.
Okay.
We've tried other sizes and they don't work. But what we do is we use that whole bird. So the chicken breast becomes tenders, which go into our, white meat preparations for General Tso's or orange chicken or any of those things. The sort of larger chicken breast gets shaved and that becomes the sort of sliced white meat for our chicken with broccoli and those types of dishes. The thigh becomes our chicken teriyaki, our chicken on a stick, which is also phenomenal.
Yes.
The legs, they get quartered and that becomes the dark meat for our General Tso's. The wings we sell, our wings are phenomenal. And then all of the remaining parts become the broth for our wonton soup, our chicken noodle soup, and all of the other applications that we use. And so, people ask, what makes things different, or why is our General Tso so good, or why are any of our dishes so good? And I think it really starts from whole bird preparation, like you said, and it's just attention to detail and sort of quality ingredients.
I love that story, and also kind of coming back also to the point that nothing goes to waste in that kitchen. You're doing something with everything that comes in.
Oh, it's amazing. Not to belabor the point, but watching the guys in the kitchen work when chickens come in is simultaneously horrifying, but also like amazing to watch, like the sort of speed and efficiency with which they work. I mean, we're blessed in our restaurant to have key people that have been there for very, very long. In our kitchen, you know, our top 4 guys have been there for 10 plus years. You know, my top 2 servers have been there. I'm describing Fox Chapel here, but our top 2 servers have been here for, you know, 8 to 10 years. Everyone in front has been there for 8 to 10 years. My head bartender has been there for 12 years. And so we have just amazing consistency across the restaurant.
Yes.
Which that allows for us to stand the test of time.
Right. So Todd, you've described some of the aspects of the restaurant so well. I'd love to talk a little bit about the family. And do you want to start with your wife and tell us a little bit about her and her involvement in the business?
Yeah, of course. She's less of a public speaker and a little more nervous about things like this. She would have been rehearsing for weeks leading up to it. And
so you're the spokesperson
So I'm
today.
the spokesperson
Yes.
a little bit. Although, you know, in the restaurant, it's different. I think it's when you have the time to think about it that she gets a little bit more nervous. But you mentioned I'm the in-law. It's funny, when we approached my in-laws with this idea to move back from Dallas and take over the restaurant, their first response was, sure, we've got a spot for Kristen. And I think my wife was like, well, that's not exactly what we wanted.
Yeah.
And so, you know, how we've accounted for that a little bit is, you know, if you're in that restaurant on any given day, you'll see me. I've sort of put in a lot more on the FaceTime side.
Right.
So that I can build up some of the credibility that, you know, maybe inherently comes with being part of the Wan family.
Right. You know, during COVID and a lot of things got shut down, I know the businesses moved to more of a takeout. And you were saying to me earlier that that's sort of when Jimmy Wan Jr. sort of took over a little bit more of the business because it wasn't necessary for the whole family to be there. But then as the restaurants have, you know, fully reopened and come back, it just felt like a good time to change over to the next generation. And you and your wife were out of state, you moved back home, and now you're really getting entrenched in the business. For folks that don't know much about the Wan family history, can you give us a little summary of like some of the other restaurants? Because I think there was at least one or so before.
We can go all the way back. I'm better at this, a little bit better at the history than even my wife is. And there's also a fantastic article in Shady Ave magazine too that touches on a bit of this. But, you know, my father-in-law moved here from Taiwan when he was 18. Immediately went to work in restaurants in New York, sort of got the itch to go somewhere else, went all the way down to Florida, hooked through Texas. He actually bought his first restaurant in Iowa.
Oh, wow.
It did not go well. He ended up coming back. He met my mother-in-law in New York, and they decided to move back to Pittsburgh and opened a restaurant in Beaver. Didn't go especially well. They moved back to New York. Then they got a call from my grandmother-in-law, my mother's mother, about a spot in Fox Chapel that had opened up. And if they wanted to come back, she thought it was perfect for them to open a restaurant. And so they got together with an old chef and they opened Taipei. That was about 38 years ago, 1986. With Taipei, they opened restaurants, a few. There was one in Shady Side, one in Green Tree. I'm probably forgetting one.
But they branched it out.
They branched it out.
Yeah.
They grew, but maybe not as successfully as they would have hoped. When my father-in-law got an opportunity and located a site in Cranberry 18 years ago, he opened that on his own with some other partners. And then a year after Cranberry opened, I mean, back then Cranberry was, you know, fields and farms.
Yeah,
I mean, maybe not completely, but not what it is today.
I worked up in Cranberry from way back when they mostly called it Crider's Corner because there was like a gas station on the corner. And then all these industrial parks started happening. I specifically remember when Jimmy Wan's Cranberry opened. We went there a ton for lunch. I mean, it was always excellent.
Yeah. The family actually got apartments up in Cranberry because, you know, opening a restaurant, creating that base of customers. I mean, it's a 24-hour a day, 7-day a week job.
Yes.
And, you know, if you want to be able to even take a break for a minute, like you need to be close by. And so that was 18 years ago. 17 years ago, Jimmy left Taipei. So my father-in-law left Taipei. And then 15 years ago, we opened in Fox Chapel. And what's funny enough is that's actually my wife moved back from college to open Cranberry and to open Fox Chapel before we sort of ended up in New York and then away from town for almost 15 years before coming back to Fox Chapel. This is Todd Brezinski from Jimmy Wan's, and you're listening to the Pittsburgh Dish.
All right, well, let's get back to, where you now step in. Like for you personally, what are some of the most interesting things you've learned about being a restaurateur?
It's interesting. I was an extremely picky eater when I was growing up. And so my favorite restaurant growing up was Chili's. No shame in that. I still like Chili's a lot. Although I would say, maybe not as great as its heyday, but I didn't actually start experiencing restaurants until after I graduated college. I finally had some disposable income. I didn't exactly have roommates that wanted to go out to restaurants, but I spent years in Boston sort of just going to places, sitting at the bar, having food for one, and, sort of developing a love for different cuisines and different food items and all of that. Since then, I've always been, maybe what you would call a foodie, although, Pan Asian, foodie is one of those words that goes in and out of style. And when we lived in Dallas, so in Dallas, like restaurant sort of functions more as like a status symbol, and so it's about where you go and, how much you spend a little bit on dinner.
Yeah.
And moving back to Pittsburgh, the most interesting thing has been, it's about knowing the owners. It's about having a consistent experience. It's about sort of knowing who you're supporting.
Connection.
Exactly.
It's a Pittsburgh thing, I got to tell you.
Pittsburgh, at the end of the day, is a collection of small towns, and each town has, so much community within it.
Yes. Yeah.
And, that works to our benefit, where we've been adopted almost from day one as part of our neighborhood, as, part of the restaurant, where we have developed these friendships and these relationships with longtime regulars in a short amount of time.
Yeah.
In Pittsburgh, that just goes such a long way.
Yes. So Todd, you just have me thinking, as you are back and you're learning your restaurant business, are there other restaurateurs that you are creating bonds with? I mean, whether they are just helping you out with your business or coming into your business?
We have a lot of restaurant owners that are regulars at Jimmy Wan's.
Oh, really?
And through that, we've actually changed how we visit other restaurants, because we want to support sort of our good customers and friends and people that we've met through the restaurant. So, I'll give you some examples. Like Kevin, who owns Knox's Tavern, is a regular at our bar. And, Knox's Tavern has now become a family favorite. Local Provisions and Scott Pekarsik, I mentioned.
Yes.
They, again, he comes into our bar. A funny story, we actually used to go to a different Italian restaurant, but then we met Frank Pasqualino, who owns Pasqualino's in Penn Hills. And now that's our family Italian restaurant on Sunday nights when we all go out.
Did you mention that Jamilka and Diane from Lilith stop in to eat quite often?
Yeah, for sure. And it's funny, like a lot of industry folks do love Jimmy Wan's, but they also like sort of tucking away in the corners and just having a nice meal. So, Adam Millerin, who's a fantastic food photographer and a good friend of ours and a regular at the restaurant, he sees people all over the restaurant and he's like, oh, that's so-and-so from here and that's so-and-so from there. And it really is quite the legacy at Jimmy Wan's, but also like it's, restaurant people supporting restaurant people, which is great also.
Such a Pittsburgh thing. So Todd, where did you grow up?
I grew up in northern New Jersey.
Okay. And where did you and Kristen meet?
So we met at Boston College.
Okay.
We both went to college in Boston.
And then you said you moved around a little bit. So from Boston, where did you all head?
Kristen came back here to open the restaurants.
Yes.
I made my way to New York. I had a career in finance, working at a hedge fund.
Okay.
Kristen moved out and joined me. And then we left to go to Chicago, where I went to business school. out of business school, I went into management consulting with Boston Consulting Group. And so we moved to Dallas where we had 2 girls. And it was sort of right after the birth of our second daughter that we realized the importance of having family around.
Yeah.
And that's when my wife will tell you this. That's when I approached her with the idea of moving back to Pittsburgh and taking over the restaurants. It was one night at about 3 a.m. after feeding the baby. So
wow, yeah.
Maybe not when you do your best thinking, but I sat on the idea for about 2 weeks and I still felt good about it.
Yeah. So you're really part of the catalyst of your family moving back and her being able to be a closer part of the family restaurant.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
I've said this many times, and we've talked about sort of the generational shift. There aren't many opportunities to take over successful small businesses in a reasonable way. And largely those opportunities are with family.
Right.
But a lot of times kids have grown up in that industry. And so they're a little bit less interested in being a part of it going forward. Whereas, I'm a bit of an outsider in many ways. And so I think had a good assessment of sort of what this could do for our family and how we could sort of branch out from here. Fun fact is my wife and I are about the same age right now as my father-in-law was when he opened Taipei.
Oh, wow.
And so whenever we're sort of feeling down about, all the complexity that we've added to our life, I like to think of that and, all the success that he's had and just think about we're already building off the base that he has established and my in-laws have established over the course of, 30, 38 years.
Yeah.
I have customers every day who say, we've been eating here since Jimmy opened Taipei. And that's amazing.
Yes.
Yeah. How many opportunities do you get to do that?
Yeah. Please inherit this legacy. Please keep it going because people love it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's funny, in Pittsburgh, you probably see more of that than anywhere else I've lived. It's just, there is a bit of that coming home feeling. Like a lot of our friends in our neighborhood or that we've met in various social settings, like they are folks that left for college or left for, their sort of early adulthood and then returned home when they had kids because Pittsburgh is a fantastic place to raise kids.
I agree. So Todd, let's move forward. What are some of the goals that you see ahead of you? You and Kristen have your eyes more closely on the Fox Chapel location, and Jimmy Wan Jr. has his eyes a little bit more closely on the Cranberry location. But you guys are all working in concert.
Yeah, we're basically talking every day about sort of Jimmy Wan's the enterprise,
yes.
but then Jimmy has more time and connections spent in Cranberry, and Chris and I have more of that spent in Fox Chapel.
Yes.
But the idea is sort of to make, to standardize where we can. It's very clear that the restaurant started with the same blueprint, but when you have different kitchens and different eyes on everything, they've drifted apart. Part of our goal is to have them drift closer together.
Yeah. Like there may be one or two menu items that are slightly different, or maybe to your point earlier, it's about those long-term customers and maybe the taste in Cranberry are a little bit different. And so we might put a filet on or something like that to just change the menu up. But
oh, for sure.
Right.
Customers are not shy to tell you whether they like, the hot and sour soup in Cranberry better than it is in Fox Chapel, even if it, is almost imperceptibly different to most people. People have their favorites.
Right.
And honestly, part of it's just the ambiance, and I don't mean that to say that either restaurant, I think they're both beautiful restaurants and a great place to eat. But if you're used to some place, the food tastes more familiar. And if you're less used to some place, so much of taste and what you appreciate from restaurants is context. And so, you could tell me, Chris and I have had people in Fox Chapel stop us when we're at other restaurants to say, oh, since you guys are back, the food is so much better.
Yes.
And nothing has changed, to be clear. We haven't changed any recipes. There's more specials, et cetera. But if you got General Tso's chicken a year ago and you got it today, it is the same recipe with the same chicken. But when you feel the effort and that my wife and I have put into the ambiance and the staff and training and all of that, that can heighten, even the same food.
Absolutely. I completely agree. Just knowing that this next generation is there, it gives it a whole new feel and possibly to some folks a whole new taste. I'd love to just jump forward. So you guys are in the business now. Any place you want to take the restaurants? What's on your mind?
For sure. I mean, my wife and I are ambitious. We moved here, because we wanted to do a lot, right? Like we wanted to own our own business and see where that took us. Right now we're sort of in the phase where we're seeing, how we can make the two restaurants operate more efficiently just for our own time. There's a potential next phase, which is, opening another Jimmy Wan's or just opening another restaurant, or absent that, opening another business. So we're looking at a whole range of opportunities, but right now we're focused on making Jimmy Wan's the best experience it can be, because we think there's a lot more potential in both restaurants.
Yes. So Todd, I'd love to give you a moment to go ahead and tell everyone where they can find Jimmy Wan's and how they can follow you if they want to, see your social feed, all of that good stuff.
For sure. So right now, it's a good time to follow both Jimmy Wan's Fox Chapel and Jimmy Wan's Cranberry on Instagram. We're in the middle of the 15th anniversary for Fox Chapel, and so we're doing a big giveaway with a bunch of, food influencers and people in the food community within Pittsburgh that we know and like. In general, that's where we like to keep our customers updated on new dishes and just what's going on in the world of Jimmy Wan's.
All right. And then the website too
is just jimmywans.com.
All right. jimmywans.com. That's easy.
All right. Easy enough.
All right, Todd, we are down to the last question. I don't know exactly what your answer will be for this, but the name of the show is The Pittsburgh Dish. What's the best dish you've eaten this past week?
I'll give one homer answer, which is, so my chef walked out of the kitchen last weekend, and he just asked me to try something without any context, and it was black truffle soup dumplings, and they were amazing. Like from the first batch, and he doesn't even like truffles. He sort of thought that the truffles on their own were disgusting, but he sort of knocked it out of the park. And so that's part of our new specials right now. The non-homer pick is my favorite other local restaurant, and we don't get out much. So most everything is within a 5-minute proximity of Jimmy Wan's and Fox Chapel, but is the Spoon Burger at Local Provisions. Which is, for me, the best burger in Pittsburgh, although I'm working on trying some more.
There's a lot to try. Could you remind folks, where is Local Provisions?
Local Provisions is in that Fox Chapel Plaza, right sort of catty corner to Altavia.
That's right. Best bites this week. Todd Brezinski of Jimmy Wan's. Thanks so much for being on the Pittsburgh Dish.
Thanks for having me.
As grilling season ramps up, let's check in with Catherine Montest and see what she's drinking when she's out at the barbecue. Hey, Catherine, welcome back to the podcast. How you doing?
I'm really well, Doug. It's great to see you again.
You too. And we're in the height of summer right now. I know a lot of people are doing grilling and barbecuing. What wines are on your mind that go with that barbecue season?
Wow, barbecue season. Oh, it's so much fun. I'm thinking barbecue, you put a big juicy hamburger or a big juicy steak on the grill, and it gets all those luscious grill marks and such on there. One of the best wines to go with a great big meaty burger or a big meaty steak is Zinfandel.
Oh, yeah. Are we talking a red Zinfandel?
We're talking red Zinfandel.
Okay.
We're not talking about the white Zinfandel that Mom used to drink as she was transitioning kind of into wine and away from soda pop. No, we're talking about delicious, rich, luscious Zinfandel. It's mostly grown in California.
In California, it's like the Lodi Valley. A couple of my favorite Zins are from that area.
California, absolutely. Lodi Valley. One of the ones that I really enjoy, and I brought a bottle of this for you today, is from a winery called Armida. And last time my husband and I were out in California, we ended up upon their winery, and we liked it so much, we get a case from them 2 or 3 times a year.
Wow, this is really saying something.
It's really delicious. It's got bold red ripe fruit flavors. You're tasting raspberries, strawberries, even some plum in there. And it's the nice thing about the Zinfandel and why it works so well with steak is steaks can be kind of fatty.
Yes.
And the acid level in the Zinfandel is just high enough to cut through that. And when you balance the fattiness of the steak with the acidity that's happening in the Zinfandel, it pops and brings even more of those fruit flavors into your mouth with the wine.
That sounds so good. I was also wondering, when we are grilling, we have those smoky flavors and those charred flavors. And does that also then tend to work with the Zinfandel?
Absolutely. Your palate is so good, Doug. It's really kind of dazzling with the things you just come up with so very quickly.
So Zinfandel good with grilled meats.
Absolutely. And grilling, since you've got the grill hot, and maybe not everybody likes the big, bold red that slaps you around a little bit. Another way to go is to slice up some citrus. I'm talking lemons, limes, and oranges.
Okay.
Pop them on the grill. Get a couple little char marks going on those. And you're going to mix those together with a bottle of Grenache. And I also like to add a bottle of Cava, which is a Spanish version of champagne, so to speak. So you make a sangria.
Oh.
So this is my favorite summer sangria, and I'm planning on serving this in about 2 weeks. We're having folks over for ribs. Grill the citrus, 2 of each, and put them in a bowl or other serving thing, and a bottle of Grenache, a bottle of Cava, all of your fruit, a cup of simple syrup, and a cup of brandy. And you just give it a stir, throw a little ice at it.
I was going to say, you need to chill this one.
You're going to want to chill it.
It's sangria. And I think this is like the perfect quote unquote summer punch when you said get a big bowl.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It's definitely a summer punch. It's just absolutely delicious. And you bring those little smoky notes in to the wine. It's absolutely divine.
It's so different. I haven't really ever heard of a grilled citrus sangria.
Well, I hope you try it this summer. You'll be glad you did.
Oh, I love it. Catherine, thank you so much.
My pleasure, Doug. Always good to see you.
You too. You can learn more about Catherine and even book a private event. Check out her website at www.yourfairywhinemother.com. If you've been following my personal social media at Doug Cooking, you know that I'm one of the home cook contestants on this season of The Great American Recipe on PBS. I'm giving a call to my other fellow contestants from this season to see what they're cooking at home. This week, we talk with Tim Harris in Fort Mill, North Carolina, and get his take on shrimp with cheesy grits. Let's give him a call and learn a little bit more about this dish.
Hello.
Hey, Tim.
Doug, how's it going?
It's great. How are you doing today?
Doing really well, my friend. How about you?
I'm doing great. And Tim, I want to talk about this cheesy shrimp and grits recipe that you sent us. Thank you so much for the recipe.
Oh, no, thanks for the opportunity. Thanks for asking.
Yeah. Tim, is there anything about this shrimp and grits that really is your spin and makes it a little different than some of the other versions in the South?
Well, a lot of Southern versions will use a sausage, andouille sausage, smoked sausage. I use bacon, not just to get the grease to start the roux, but just kind of to like level it down. I want the shrimp to be the star of the show.
Yes.
And the same thing with the cheesy grits. I use the Colby Jack instead of like a sharp cheddar because I just kind of want a mild cheesy flavor in there.
Yep.
I don't want the grits to be overpowered with cheese. I kind of want the shrimp and the gravy to be the star.
It sounds so good. And for any of our listeners that haven't seen the recipe yet on the blog, the grits are pretty straightforward. You start out with actually chicken broth. You add the grits. When they're almost done and thick, you add half and half that shredded Colby that you mentioned and some butter. And I think really the star here on the top is the shrimp gravy. So like we just said, you're starting out with a few strips of bacon. Do you cut the bacon up first before you render out like the fat? Is that how you do it?
I like to leave it whole strips.
Okay.
Just to kind of render out the fat of it, make some, and I cook it extra crispy, get extra crispy, strips out of it before I set those aside. And, we keep the fat in the pan, and that's what I'm going to start my saute with.
And so you're putting some onion in there, and then eventually tomatoes, butter, garlic, and white wine. And then just to make sure you don't overcook the shrimp, we're adding the shrimp like near the very end. Is that right?
Right. If your gravy is kind of thinner than you'd like it a a little thicker, you can. I use just a little tablespoon or so of flour, kind of like just pick up the roux a little bit more, just to thicken it up a little bit. Because once you add the shrimp in there, they will draw a little bit of moisture out of the shrimp. You still want them nice and juicy, but it'll still draw some moisture and it'll kind of thin it back out again. It's not a thick gravy. It's not like a dinner gravy. Yeah. It's more like just kind of like a looser gravy to kind of mix in with the grits and everything.
I love it. Tim, it sounds delicious. And you sent over some pictures. They look amazing. And I know you have so many other recipes, especially like in barbecue. If people want to find and follow you and your food, where can they find more about you?
Oh, great. Yeah. I love grilling and I love the barbecue. You can find me on Instagram. Dapper.dads.kitchen is my handle. Tim Harris, the same thing on Facebook. I also have a website, which I just launched, dapperdadskitchen.com. That will get you to all my social media as well. And another great place to find me is going to be cooking alongside you on season 3 of PBS's Great American Recipe.
Oh, that's right. We will be on this season Monday nights or on pbs.org or streaming on the PBS app. Tim Harris, thank you so much for this recipe, and thank you for being on The Pittsburgh Dish.
Oh, thanks for having me, Doug.
If you have a recipe, share it with us. Just go to our website at www.pittsburghdish.com and look for our Share a Recipe form. That's our show for this week. We'd like to thank all of our guests and contributors, and to Kevin Selecki of Carnegie Accordion Company for providing the music to our show. We'll be back again next week with another fresh episode. Stay tuned.